Hey Warriors, have you heard the news about Kurv? Well, they now have a new distribution schedule. This is some breaking news that came out a few days ago. Thought I'd go over it, give my reaction to it, see if it really matters, and also talk about how impressive some of these Kurv ETFs have been and if they might actually be a better substitute alternative to the very popular YieldMax ETF. So let's read over this new distribution schedule bulletin that Kurv put out. Alrighty here, so Kurv Investment Management has announced upcoming changes to its distribution schedule. So starting February 4th, the following changes will be implemented. So number one, all Kurv ETFs will now be issued at 6 a.m. on each declaration date. So the distribution announcement, I know a lot of you guys are going to be waking up super early to hear about, hey, how much am I going to be getting in my Kurv ETF distribution? I know you're going to be setting your alarms. Super exciting news right there. And then number two, all Kurv ETF distribution cycles will now be staggered throughout the month. So you might be wondering, why is Kurv now making these changes? Well, they are responding to investors' desire to receive distributions on a staggered distribution cycle. I really have to wonder how many people were actually wanting this, how many people were actually complaining about this. I did listen to some high yield dividend warriors on live streams threaten to take their money out of YieldMax if they didn't change to a weekly payout schedule. And then they're basically holding them hostage, right? They do pour a lot of money into these funds. Roundhill, they kind of changed the game when they started having those weekly paying income ETFs, and YieldMax followed. So this is kind of Kurv just following the trend here. I suppose it's not a bad thing for weekly dividends to happen. Here it's not necessarily weekly. We'll go over the actual distribution schedule here. They're just changing how their ETFs pay out the dividends throughout the month. So it's not that like they're one regarding Tesla, T-SLIP, TSLP. It's not that they're going to pay out their dividends every single week. It's just going to be staggered with the other Kurv ETF so that it's paying out every single week if you happen to own some of these ETFs. Also, just a reminder that if you're wondering how these income ETFs work, I've actually done an interview a long time ago, right when these ETFs first came out, with their fund manager, and we went over specifics on how these ETFs actually work, some of the benefits, some of the cons. So be sure you check out that video. But anyway, their distribution schedule is now the Tesla one will pay out the first week. Then we have Amazon and Microsoft in week 2, Apple and Google in week 3, and then Netflix, and then the Kurv Tech Titans one, that's going to give you exposure to the top tech companies out there. That's going to be paying out in week 4. And then they also give us kind of a model for how February and March pay out, and they should be able to follow this model for other months as well. Different declaration dates, ex-dividend date, right? That's the one that really matters, and then the payable date. It looks like they're paying every single Wednesday. February 5th is a Wednesday, or I'm sorry, excuse me, the ex-dividend date is every Wednesday. The payable date would then be the Thursdays. So every Thursday you're gonna get a dividend payment from Kurv. I just wanna emphasize that a mistake that I see a lot of newer investors making is that they focus too much on dividend frequency and things that are really more cosmetic, more trivial, like what week they pay. It doesn't matter if it pays monthly or weekly, right? That actually makes next to no difference in a compounding perspective, cow pounding. It actually really does not make a difference. I know it makes you feel better in your head that, hey, I might be getting paid every single week. I know it's probably releasing like some serotonin that makes you feel good that more money is coming in at more frequently. But you know, whether you got 10 cents every single week of the month or 40 cents once a month, it really doesn't make that big of a difference over the long run from a cow pounding perspective. People that focus too much on dividend frequency, it's basically the same thing as obsessing over the type of tires a car might have instead of checking if the car actually has a running engine. I would just really encourage investors to L2B, learn to budget. If you're caring about when a dividend payment is coming, if you're like sweating about that, that usually means that you're not in the right financial position to be living off dividends just yet. So might need to do a little bit more work until you get there, right? For me, I don't really care when my dividends come in as long as they come in. It can be every quarter, it can be semi-annually, monthly, it does not matter to me. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about some of these Kurv ETFs. I'm just gonna give you a high-level summary. So this is for people that want that enhanced income. It's a way to own companies. Like Amazon doesn't pay a dividend, right? But since they're doing call options, it's a way to own Amazon and then also get dividends, something that wouldn't be possible with the underlying position. So owning AMZP is in a way giving you some exposure to Amazon, but you also get paid those juicy dividends. So this would be particularly useful if one believed that the company wouldn't go up much during the duration of the call option. So let's say, hey, I don't think Amazon's actually going to do that great during the next earnings call. I actually think the stock will either trade sideways or go down. Then potentially doing a covered call would be very beneficial, right? Because we're getting those premiums for doing the call option. And if it goes down, if it goes sideways, we still get to keep our shares and don't lose any of that upside. Also, some of the benefits of just investing with Kurv is that you have their industry professionals doing all the work for us, right? We can see their executive leadership team, their directors. These guys have worked at places such as Goldman Sachs, advisory company EY, very prestigious companies here. These guys are bringing decades plus of experience, that prestige there as well. So these guys are going to be handling your money. You are paying for that expertise though. And it's also super time consuming to do this on your own. You often need a lot of capital. So in the past, this was really only available to high net worth individuals. So that's why a lot of these income ETFs have came up, right? JP Morgan Chase, the Goldman Sachs, the YieldMaxes, the Roundhills. They've kind of even playing fields. So now the ordinary retail investor can also get some exposure to these income ETFs. So we are going to be paying for this, right? We see right here, the expense ratio is 99 basis points. It's about in line with what YieldMax is. So both are about the same. You are paying for that expertise. Kurv also does own these ETFs synthetically sometimes, but also sometimes it just owns them outright. It's whatever they feel is best. So they're getting that income from stocks that might pay dividends, right? Some of their stocks like Google pays a really small dividend, Apple pays a small dividend, Microsoft. They're also gonna get income from their collateral positions such as bonds, and then of course those sweet juicy premiums. So the place that this might fit in a portfolio is that it might complement other equities in a portfolio, and overall, if done correctly, it should lower that volatility risk, right? So if the market takes a huge tumble, hopefully these income ETFs won't do as bad. That's assuming that it's all being ran correct. Kurv also just has way less products than YieldMax here overall. You can see that's only, 7 ETFs here. YieldMax seems to have an income ETF on anything that moves these days. Notice how I didn't say makes money. All right, let's also talk about some of their impressive performance here. So the one that's being ran on Amazon, AMZP, since their inception, which was on Halloween of 2023 or just the day before, they've actually beaten the overall market, which is very impressive. So they've returned 46%. This is with dividends reinvested, to the market's 36%. That's a 10% beat, which is very impressive. For reference, Amazon, the overall stock, has returned 57%. So it trails that, but that's to be expected, right? In a bull market like we're having, covered call ETFs, they're going to lag behind the underlying equity. And then the one that's being ran on Tesla, TSLP or TSLIP, this one has been out about the same time, October 23rd of 23. It has returned 67%. Again, that's with those dividends reinvested, right? So we see this one has a yield about 24%. So it's returned 67%, and that also beats the market, which has given 49% in that same time span. And just like Amazon, it lags overall Tesla. Tesla has returned 93% in that time span, but that's to be expected. But most importantly, it's beaten the YieldMax counterpart in TSLI or Tesla, which is given a return of 46%. So you might notice in the two funds that I've covered right now, neither of these seem to have those dreaded words that we hate to say, NAV erosion, right? If we look at T-Slip, they're actually up in terms of capital appreciation. If we look at something like Tesla, which has been out a little bit longer, about a whole year longer actually, you can see this is down almost 70%. NAV erosion is very real with this one. If you take a look at the Amazon YieldMax one, this one is down about 5%. So not as big NAV erosion with AMZ, but still, if you're asking me, would I rather invest in a fund that beats the market and has no NAV erosion, right? It's protecting that principal that I've worked really hard for, or one that might be paying you out some larger dividends, or at least claiming that they are, but my principal is getting eroded every single month and potentially not being protected. I would much rather choose the one that is going to protect against NAV erosion. All right, guys, just remember, so some of these Kurv ETFs, they're gonna have a little bit lower yield than their YieldMax counterparts, but hey, if I'm gonna be getting that NAV protection and they're gonna be good stewards of my money, I'd much rather do that. Also, just remember that dividends are never guaranteed, right? Just because they've done very well here in just the past year, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're gonna do well all the time. The stock market as a whole has done very well since the end of 2023. It's not really time and tested. These ETFs have only really been around in a bull market. It's a really small window of performance. So far, they've done very well, they've excelled, but the real test will be, hey, how do these funds do when the market isn't doing so hot? How's it gonna do during a market downturn? And then also, how is it gonna do during that recovery? That's what I really wanna see. If the market recovers too fast, then the covered calls are really gonna limit the upside of a lot of these ETFs. And this is one that I don't think gets talked about enough, is that another big risk of a lot of these income ETFs is that they are actively managed. And people that work at a company, they're constantly changing. So just because Kurv has had these people in charge now that seem to be good stewards of our money, that doesn't mean that they will always be able to replicate this. We just have to hope in the future, if you're one that wants to long-term buy and hold these, that they continue to do a good job with our money. Hopefully they're training that next generation on how to do these trades successfully. I think as we saw with the NAV erosion or just maintaining that NAV, there is a little bit of a difference between how YieldMax does it and how Kurv does it, and that's going to be changing from institution to institution. All right, guys, that kind of covers the main points that I wanted to talk about today. If you're a good investor, it really should not be impacting anything that you do day to day. It should not be impacting any decisions on whether an ETF should be bought or not based on when it pays. That's just a little ridiculous. But hey, I think these Kurv ETFs, they do often get overlooked, but they have been giving out some very impressive results. So let me know in the comments what you think about Kurv. Make sure you join the Discord. We have some great conversations about income ETFs in there. Doesn't matter your skill level, if you're brand new, if you've been a long-term investor. Thank you to all my Patreons, and we will catch you on the next one.
I'm definitely going to irritate some YouTuber because I'm eating in my morning coffee. There you go. I'm eating. Yeah, don't watch it.